In this video, Magnus Carlsen destroys Anna Cramling with a smothered bishop checkmate that is so insane, even Magnus Carlsen himself could not believe it. Alright, in the game, Magnus Carlsen is white. He opens 1d4, and Anna Cramling goes knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, d5, and here Magnus has a big choice, and he goes for his recent favorite move, that is 4g3, going into the Catalan opening as white. And of course, the main idea behind the Catalan is you get that bishop on the g2 square where it pressures the long diagonal, and white is going to have a tremendous amount of pressure on the queen side for the rest of this game. Now from here, Anna Cramling, bishop b4, one of the strongest moves in this position. And here on move 5, Magnus Carlsen already throws a big curveball. The standard move here is bishop d2, and sometimes white plays knight b to d2. However, here Magnus unleashes the disrespect with the move knight to c3. Oh my goodness, what the heck is Magnus doing? Well, the problem with this move is that anytime black can play d takes c4, and it's going to be incredibly hard for white to win back that pawn. And by the way, in case you are wondering, Magnus does have nightmares about this position here, because this is the exact position where Hans Niemann beat Magnus in 2022. So for example, in that Hans Magnus game that everyone knows about, the famous cheating scandal game, here Hans Niemann went castles, and then the line went a3, bishop takes, d takes, and then c5 from Hans. The game was incredible. I have it on my channel if you're curious. But anyway, back to the game. Here after knight to c3, Anna Cramling simply takes the pawn to c4 square, d takes c4, and here Magnus deviates from that game with bishop g2. Now here Anna Cramling has a big choice as black. How does she want to finish development? Well, the best moves for black here are going to be short castles, getting the king to safety, as well as ideas like knight to c6. This knight is often very good on the c6 square in this line. Now, instead of that here, Anna, she immediately tries to plug up this long diagonal with the bishop. She goes knight to d5, and of course, beyond just plugging this long diagonal, the knight does put pressure on the knight of c3, which is currently pinned by the bishop to the king. Well, Magnus, what can he do here? Well, the main moves for white are going to be bishop to d2 and queen c2. You definitely don't want to allow a knight takes c3 and then bishop takes c3 with black winning a pawn for nothing. Now, in the game, Magnus goes bishop d2. However, the computer does like the idea of queen c2, the follow-up of e4, trying to gain space in the middle of the board right away. Now, after bishop d2, black castles. Again, queen c2 is a fabulous idea. Magnus misses it. He castles on the king's side. Solid stuff. And here, once again, Anna Cramling has to find the right way forward. Here, the best move is simply bishop to e7, retreating the bishop, and from there, you can follow up with a5, knight to c6, moves like that, and have a great game. Instead of that, she goes c6. Now, this move is a little bit strange. It doesn't quite synergize with this move bishop b4 very well, and we're going to find out why. Here, Magnus, he immediately strikes in the center with the move e4. Very good move. Now, knight takes, b takes, and bishop to e7. Now, here, what's going on in this position? Well, obviously, Magnus has a lot of trumps here. That bishop on g2 is very, very strong, and he has that powerful pawn center with the pawns on d4 and e4. However, on the other hand, Anna Cramling is up a pawn, that extra pawn on the c4 square, and beyond that, she has literally no weaknesses in this game. So with that being said, Magnus has to find a way to turn up the pressure, and very, very fast. He does that starting on the queen side with the move a4. Now, this is a very standard idea, getting space on the queen side, threatening perhaps a5 to a6. Here, Anna shuts it down, going a5, and now Magnus once again has a choice, and he decides to play on the queen side with the very creative move queen to b1, pressuring b7. Okay, very interesting stuff. And of course, besides pressuring b7, this move does stop the idea b5 from black. Of course, in that case, that pawn on the b5 square is going to fall to the queen. So of course, that is not a very good idea here in this position. Now, instead of that, what should black be doing? Well, b5 is a no-go. With that in mind, the other good pawn break for black is going to be the move c5. Now, this is the standard break in the queen's gambit decline for black. Black is hoping for d takes c5, then bishop takes c5, and here black would have a very, very good position. However, besides that, white does have options to keep the game complicated. Of course, d5 here is very playable, and even though black can win a pawn on the d5 square, white is going to get a tremendous amount of play for the pawn, especially given black's double pawns on the c file are a little bit weak here. Now, instead of c5, here Anna Cramling, she goes knight to a6. Not a terrible move, but not really fighting for the center. I mean, what is the knight doing on a6? It's not going to b4 with that pawn on the c3 square, and c5 was already viable on the prior move, so knight to a6, not really doing a whole lot. Now, from here, Magnus, he has a wide range of ideas that he could do. Rook to e1 and d1 is playable. Bishop e3 is fine. Instead, Magnus jumps forward with the knight to the e5 d5 square. Knight to e5 on the board. All right, Magnus turning up the heat. Of course, the idea is to target the pawn on the c4 square, and perhaps there are lines where that bishop opens up on this diagonal. Now from here, Anna Cramling, she channels Ben Feingold energy. She goes for Ben Feingold's favorite move, f6, the Ben Feingold counterattack. As Ben Feingold always says, always play f6 or something like that. Anyway, here Magnus, now his knight's being attacked. Knight to c4 is his idea. And what the heck is the point of f6 in this position? Well, Anna shows us she wants to go e5. And here she has some sort of claim in the center, that pawn being defended by f6, but Magnus could theoretically take. Well, here Magnus, instead of d takes e5, he simply goes bishop to e3, supporting the pawn on the d4 square. Now if black takes on d4, white takes back, and the pawn is being defended by the bishop. All right, very good stuff. Now black, bishop e6, decent move. Of course, e takes d4 would have been a little bit better here. For example, after c takes d4, bishop b4, black is starting to unwind a little bit. Yes, Magnus still has pressure with that beautiful pawn center. However, overall, Anna would still be in the game. Instead of that, bishop to e6 on the board. The idea, she wants to pressure that knight on the c4 square. However, here Magnus has many different ideas. In the game, he goes knight to b6, solid idea, keeping the knight alive. Of course, real fast, there is the pawn sacrifice d5. This would have been very good as well. And the idea behind this move is after black takes, you take back, and after bishop takes, you jump in with the bishop to the b6 square. Oh my goodness, the intermediate move hitting the queen, and after queen to d7, of course, the queen has to defend the bishop on the d5 square. Then Magnus jumps in, rook to d1 with the pin on the bishop. Oh my goodness, that would have been unbelievably strong. Instead of that, knight to b6 on the board from Magnus here. Decent move, keeping the knight alive, and the game continues. Now, of course, Magnus is threatening the rook on b8. Anna Cramling's no dummy. She's a women's federal master. She goes rook b8, keeping the rook alive, and now Magnus, he goes for the d5 break. And here, that pawn, of course, is supported by the knight on b6. That is just enough to keep it alive. Now, black, c takes d5, e takes d5, bishop f7. The bishop's got to go somewhere, and now rook to d1. Magnus piling up the pressure on the d-file. Man, Magnus bringing the heat against his lower-rated female opponent in this game. All right, bishop d6 from black, of course, blockading that pawn on the d5 square. You do not want to allow d6 in this game. And from here, knight c4, attacking the bishop that is blockading. Good idea. Knight to c5, and here Magnus simply takes the bishop on d6. Now, this move is decent, knight takes d6. However, I think Magnus Carlsen could have delayed it a little bit longer. I mean, he still has this tension on the bishop on d6. He can always take it, and in the meantime, something like queen to b5 or queen to b6, simply piling up the pressure on the queen side could have been better. However, knight takes d6, not a bad move. Magnus is going for an endgame. After queen takes d6, queen b5, trying to bring the queen into the game and threatening that knight on c5. Now, from here, black, rook f to c8, logical move, and Magnus, rook a to b1. Now, real fast, you may be wondering, why did Magnus not take the pawn on the a5 square? And if you thought that, oh boy, you gotta learn your elementary tactics, my friend. After queen takes a5, black simply goes knight to b3, forking the queen and the rook. Now, technically, this is not the worst thing ever. Here, Magnus could go queen b4, and then after the queen trade and the knight trade for the rook, here, Magnus is still doing relatively okay. I mean, for the exchange, he has the pawn and the bishop pair. That's technically enough to keep it level here. However, Magnus, he sees no reason to go down that route. Instead, rook a to b1 here, getting the rook to control that b3 square. And now, of course, Magnus is threatening the pawn on a5. So here, Anna Cramling, bishop e8. Good move. The bishop indirectly attacking the pawn on the a4 square as well as the queen on b5. So, of course, that being said, Magnus takes on a5. Anna Cramling takes on a4 with the knight, putting pressure on the c3 pawn. Not bad. And here, Magnus, rook d to c1. This move looks a little bit passive, but it's all right. The pawn is going to threaten to go to c4 and then c5. That would be very, very strong for white. Now here, black, b6, okay, nudging the queen b4, and now the queens come off the board, and Magnus transforms the position into a position where he has the bishop pair in the endgame, and an overall better position, especially with that pass pawn on the d5 square. And of course, this all leads into that beautiful smothered mate by Magnus with those two bishops against the black king, so you do not want to miss that smothered mate. Stick around for that. All right, from here, Anna, knight to c3, hitting the rook on the b1 square, not bad. Rook b2, getting out of the attack, and here Anna Cramling makes her big biggest mistake of the game. She goes bishop to a4. All right, this is a logical move. I mean, after all, black is threatening knight to d1, forking both the rook and the bishop with the discovered attack on the rook. All kinds of crazy tactics here. However, in this position, Magnus has an unbelievable idea, and that is simply bishop to h3. I mean, bam, white simply targets the rook on the c8 square, and the hidden idea behind this move is white is gaining tempo. He wants to go d6, then d7, and now beyond attacking the c8 square, that bishop now also controls the d7 square, and that is the key. All right, for example, the main line here, the rook has to move, then you go d6, followed by a b5, trying to block the bishop out of the game. And then, funnily enough, if the bishop takes, you have the insane move, bishop to f1, skewering the rook and the bishop. Oh my goodness, this is so good for white. So overall, in this position, bishop to h3 was, of course, the idea. However, Magnus did not find it. And by the way, real fast, in case you were curious, instead of bishop to a4, the best move for Anna Cramling was bishop to b5. And from here, you're threatening knight to e2 with the fork on the rook and the king. Oh my goodness, that would have been the move. All right, instead of that here, bishop a4 on the board, and Magnus does not find bishop h3. Instead, he goes h4, gaining space on the king side. Okay, very logical and thematic idea of Magnus trying to go h5, maybe even h6, alpha 0 style. Of course, this idea pushing the h-pawn down the board in almost any position was heavily popularized by the computer program Alpha 0. If you haven't heard of Alpha 0, look up his games. Oh my goodness. All right, now here, Anna Cramling, what does she do? Well, the best move for her is going to be knight to d1. This is now a good idea. Simply forking the rook and the bishop. Black's going to be relatively okay here. Of course, knight d1 could have been stopped one move earlier by the idea of bishop h3. Magnus missed that in favor of h4. That's how we got there. But instead, Anna Cramling here, e4. What's her idea? Well, I suppose she's trying to block out the bishop's control of the d5 square as she threatens knight takes d5 now. However, once again, here Magnus could simply go bishop to h3 with very similar ideas as we've seen, and Magnus would go d6, d7, threaten to promote, and have an unbelievable endgame here. Now, fortunately for us, Magnus didn't play that. Bishop f4 on the board, simply threatening that rook on the b8 square. Now here, real fast, why is bishop f4 from Magnus Carlsen such a mistake? Well, the key move for Anna Cramling is going to be knight takes d5. Oh my goodness, you ignore the threat on the rook by unleashing your own threat on white's rook and the bishop. Oh my goodness. Okay, here, the main line is complicated. It goes bishop takes e4, threatening the knight on the d5 square. Then from there, black takes on f4, white trades rooks, white takes back on the f4 square, and in this position, we have a symmetrical pawn structure. Basically, black's is a little bit better, and overall, black is going to have zero trouble drawing other than the fact that she's playing Magnus freaking Carlsen. Now, instead of this, what did Anna Cramling do in the game? Instead of knight takes d5, rook a8 on the board, I guess she's trying to support the bishop and get out of the way of the attack of white's bishop. Now here, Magnus d6, good idea. Of course, bishop h3 was also a good move, perhaps even better, but d6 is the right idea. That passed pawn must be pushed. All right, here, white, knight to d1, finally getting that move in. Of course, it is a little bit too late. She wanted to do this when the bishop was still on the e3 square. However, now on f4, the bishop no longer being attacked by the knight. That's good for white. Now the rooks trade. Rook takes c8 check. Rook takes. Rook d2, threatening the knight on the d1 square. And if black is not careful, that knight could be trapped later in this game. Now black, rook c1, setting up various threats on the king on g1. So that in mind here, Magnus, king h2, the best defense. And now bishop d7. Very strong idea, simply rerouting the bishop to a better diagonal. Here it stops bishop h3 ideas. And beyond that, of course, stopping the idea of d6 here, d6 to d8 was a very, very serious threat. Black stopping it right away. All right, here, Magnus, he sees that pawn on the e4 square. Magnus is a simple man. He sees a free pawn. He takes a free pawn. Bishop takes e4. And oh boy, those bishops are starting to look pretty strong. Hint, hint, wink, wink. Stick around for that bishop checkmate. All right, now black f5, and Magnus checks the king. King f8. We're getting one step closer here. Bishop g5. Here we go. Look at those bishops lining up. Now from here, black tries to get some space for the king, but it does not work. Bishop e7, forcing the king to that e8 square. Oh my goodness, if Magnus gets a bishop over to here, Let's see what happens. Black defends the back rank. Bishop f3, the reroute. Knight c3. And now the finish. Bishop h5. Black has one move. g6. And now bishop takes g6. The bishop smothered mate against the black king. Oh my goodness. Chess YouTube, I have one question for you. Have you ever seen a bishop checkmate this beautiful? Let me know in the comment section below, and I'll see you in the next video.